Hi, I'm Chef Richard. Welcome to Chef Richard's Kitchen. Christmas is coming in a couple of weeks, and whenever Christmas comes, it always takes me kind of back to my childhood. And everybody probably knows by now I came from Omaha, and I'm really a transplant to Cincinnati, although I have adopted this city extremely well. But I remember back when I was a kid, some of the traditions we had and some of the Christmas food. I remember Christmas Eve when my grandparents had come over. These are my mother's parents, and we'd have a Christmas Eve dinner. Our Christmas was always celebrated on Christmas Eve, and it kind of, we opened our presents from our parents, and then Dad always found some reason to chase us out, the house, send us on some kind of a wild goose chase. And of course, by the time we got back, Santa had arrived. And, we were probably pretty gullible back then. But yeah, it was a fun time. And one of the things I remember about it was my granddad and his family came from Bohemia. And one of the things that they did on Christmas Eve is they always had a traditional holiday bread that they called Houska, Houska. And we're going to make it one more time. I'm going to make it for you. And this is going to be the traditional holiday bread. There was another bread that was traditional in the holiday. It was more of a German bread. It was pretty much the same dough, but it had the candied fruits, the little red, green cherries, and then it had the nuts in there. And then after it was baked, they put a frosting on top of it. And the Germans called that Stollen, Stollen, just, like it sounded if you ran out the door with it. But that was what Stollen was. But we're going to make the Bohemian Houska, and if I have a chance before Christmas, we'll make some Stollen. So, anyway, let's get started. The first thing we need is we need a cup of raisins. And you want to put this in to a glass of hot water, probably at least probably a half hour to an hour before making the bread. And we need to plump up the raisins, otherwise it'll make the whole thing dry. There's a step you can't forget. The other is you take a cup and a half of milk and you scald that, which is just heated up, and then let it cool down to about 100 to 110 degrees. And what that's going to do is it's going to help the yeast to rise. All right. We have a couple of tablespoons of yeast. We have 3/4 of a cup of slivered almonds that I chopped up. A half a cup of sugar. 2 tablespoons of lemon rind. Now be sure that you only get the yellow rind and not the underneath that white zest, or the pith in there. That's pretty bad. It's very sour. All right. A teaspoon of salt. A half a cup of shortening. And 2 eggs. All right. Did I remember to tell you the half cup of sugar? If I did, forgive me. Otherwise, there it is. So let's go ahead and we'll pull out the trusty old mixer. And let's start out with the milk. All right. And now we're going to put in the sugar. And we put the sugar and the milk in there because when the yeast is dry and kind of in suspended animation here, it's kind of gone dormant. And when it meets with water, it's going to wake up. And it's going to be hungry. And so we want, some sugar in there because that's what it's going to feed off of. Right? Let me put my yeast in there. And I'm going to put 1 cup of flour. We'll probably put 8 cups of flour all together in there, but we'll just start out with 1. This is going to kind of make a sponge, and we're going to let the yeast proof in here start to come back to life, start multiplying again. Then we'll go ahead and put the rest of the flour in. Alright, that's pretty well mixed in together. Now, here comes a matter of personal choice. Now, I've used this yeast, I get it in a big commercial container, and that's what I use. And I've been using this yeast, to make everything that I've done on this channel and everything else, and I've never had a problem with it rising. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to skip the proofing stage. If you're using one of those little, or 2 of those little packets, what I would suggest is going and having a glass of soda or a cup of coffee and wait about 20 minutes and come back. This should be bubbling in here. And if it is bubbling, that means the yeast is coming back and it's good. If you come back and there's absolutely nothing in there, you better find some more yeast, because that isn't going to go. But anyway, this will go fine. I know it will because I proofed it a couple of times with that package. And we'll just let it go. Alright, now let's go ahead and put in our eggs. And I'm going to put in my shortening. And we're going to mix this a little. Now, I'm not going to put the raisins in until really about the last. And the reason is if we put it in too early, they're just going to get smashed to pulp, and that we don't want. My lemon zest. And my chopped almonds. Now to this, I'm going to add another cup of flour. And we're going to let it fold in. Now I don't add these all at once. I usually add them a cup at a time, especially after I get up to like the 5th or the 6th cup, because it can turn and it can get stiff in a hurry. And you've got to kind of keep an eye on your dough at that point to make sure it doesn't get too dry. And that's really what I have this here for, a little measuring cup with some water in it. In case it does get a little too stiff, we can put a little water in there. All right, and our teaspoon of salt. there's 3. And once again, I'll give you the warning, and I always do when putting flour in there, start it slow. Otherwise, you're going to end up getting a flour bath coming up at you. And, once again, I'll say, ask me how I know this, because I've had one. It's starting to incorporate well in there. It's still pretty moist, so we're going to have to add more flour. Alright, now let's go ahead and let's put our raisins in. Now putting the raisins in is going to add quite a bit of liquid in here. So that's why I didn't put any water in, even though it's getting a little stiff. In fact, we're going to put just a little more flour in here because it's getting a little damp. Getting better. Right now we're just going to let it go for a little while. And this is going to do 2 things. Number 1, it's going to get the raisins and everything mixed in well together. Number 2, this is what causes the gluten to form that makes the bread, stick together and gives it a good consistency. Besides, it looks like we're going to have to add just a little more flour. Let me take a look here, and the dough is pulling away reasonably well. It looks like we could probably flip this over and let the raisins get mixed in just a little bit more. Actually, that looks much better. Pulling away rather cleanly. It's still sticky, which means that it's not crusted over, and that means it'll rise well. So let's go ahead and put this in a rising bowl. By the way, I just kept that in the oven for storage. The oven is off. I didn't bake it first. All right, there's our dough. Putting a little plastic wrap on. Now, why do we put plastic wrap on? Well, you see me often put a towel over it, which is pretty much the same. What we don't want to happen is we don't want the top layer of this to dry out, because if it does, it's not going to be able to rise properly. We want to keep it moist in there so we can let it rise. Now we're going to go ahead and set this on the stove, and we're going to let it rise for probably about an hour. And then we'll go ahead and we'll form it into our loaves. So we'll see you in about an hour. Don't go away. Okay, welcome back. It's been about an hour and a little bit longer, and the dough has risen nicely. So now it's time to turn the dough out, and let's cut it into the strips, because remember, this is a braided bread and we have to braid it. So I'm going to take and sprinkle a little bit of flour on here. And I'm going to go get the dough. And what I did is I took and I set the oven for 250 degrees. And then I set this dough on top, which just keeps it a little bit warmer than the regular ambient temperature around here. And it helps it rise. All right. All right, we're gonna knead this just a little bit, such. All right, and then we're gonna take and we're gonna roll it out. And then we're going to cut it into 2 segments. Okay, I'm going to let it sit here for just a little bit. Well, it kind of relaxes a little. All right, now what you want to do is roll this as close to a rectangle as you can get. Now remember, you're not going to get a complete rectangle, but let's just go ahead and see how close we can get to it. All right. Now, we need to cut this into two because we're going to make 2 loaves. All right, take the first one out. And now we have to take and we have to cut this into 7 segments. We want to braid 4 on the bottom and 3 on the top and set that on top of it and then let it bake. That's pretty good. All right, let's take the smaller pieces of this and set them aside, and that's what we're going to use for the top. All right. Now we're going to need to roll these out. All right, now it's time to braid. And braiding, it sounds real challenging. It actually really isn't. It's pretty easy. Go ahead and set one over the top of the other. And now on this side, set one over the top. So you see this one's over, now it's under. And then do this the same way. All right. Now, what are we going to braid? The first one is we're going to take this and put it over there. And now this, and then back. And you see what we're doing is we're just finding the ones that are on the bottom, and we're going ahead and we're braiding them. All right, when we get down to the end, we're going to pinch them closed and go around to the other side, and we're going to do the same thing. All right, now, put this on a sheet of parchment. And let's do the top. Now, if you thought the last one was easy, this one's a lead pipe cinch. All right, crimp the ends down like this. And set that on the top. This is what our loaf's going to look like when it's done. Okay, now we've gotten our loaf shaped. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover these with plastic again, and we're going to let them rise again. And after we let them, and after they rise, we're going to take and we're going to brush butter over the top of them. In this case, we want them nice and brown, but not quite as brown as it would be with an egg wash. So we're just going to take some melted butter and we're going to rub that over the top of it. So let me go ahead and let those rise. I'm going to let them rise about another hour. So I'll see you then. Don't go far. Okay, it's been about another hour, and we look at the loaf and it's risen nicely. So now before we put it in the oven, what I want to do is I want to take and I melted a little bit of butter, and I want to brush that on the top of it. It's gotten warmed up to temperature. Alright. Now we know when we egg wash it, it gets a nice golden brown on it. Well, this we don't want quite so brown. We just more want it look like it's baked. So what I'm doing is I'm just rubbing or brushing a little melted butter on it. And here we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this in the oven and we're going to allow it to bake. All right. We put this in the oven and now we're going to let it bake for, probably 20-25 minutes, and then we'll check it, see how it's doing. Okay, it's been 30 minutes, so let's go ahead, and I looked at it and it's pretty well done, so let's go ahead and pull it out. Let's go ahead and pull it out. Now that's one darn good looking loaf. So let's go ahead, let's put that on the cooling rack. And let's put the next one in. Okay, this is one good looking loaf right now. So let's go ahead and I want to put one more layer of butter on this just to make sure that it isn't too dry when we go ahead and serve it. There. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's let this cool off while the other one bakes, and then we'll cut it open and see what it looks like. Welcome back again. It's been about a half hour and the loaf seems to have cooled down rather nicely. So let's go ahead and let's cut into it and let's see what our final product looks like. Now that looks like a good loaf of bread, and that's exactly what a Bohemian Houska needs to look like. Right? It's still a little warm, but we can look at that and we can see the raisins, we can see the almond, we can see a little bit of the lemon in there, and everything's good. It's baked very nicely. The temperature is well. The consistency is very good, and we can consider this a success. So, with this said, it was my granddad that introduced me to this recipe and how much I love it. I want to dedicate this episode to him. He passed away in 1980. The man went through the Great Depression, he went through the Second War, he fought in the First War, and I always wish that I could be half the man he was. I'd be happy. So anyway, to Ernest Stokel, this is for you, and this is for the rest of you people. Thank you again for watching. Take care. God bless. Remember that cooking should be fun, and we'll see you next episode. Bye till then.